Hello today, third grade. Miss Tragi here again with you today to take us into Module 3, Lesson 7 of our Wit and Wisdom lessons. So here's our overview for today. Our essential question is still, how do stories help us understand immigrants' experiences? Our focusing question is still, what challenges do immigrants face in a new country? Today's content framing question is a wonder. What do I notice and wonder about tea with milk? And our craft question is, why are linking words and phrases important? Here's what you're going to need for today. Your iPad, paper, pencil, maybe some headphones. Same as usual. So, welcome to the start of our lesson. Today we're going to be reading and listening to a new story called Tea with Milk by Alan Say. Before we get into our story, I want you to use that paper and pencil to make yourself a notice and wonder chart of your own. I want you to notice and wonder about the cover illustration pictured right here, our author's name, and title. So take about 2 minutes, write down some quick notice and wonders about this. Here are some things you might have said. You don't have to add these to your chart, but just listen as we go over them. You might notice a girl standing by herself, that she looks unhappy, or that she looks Asian, or that the girl seems to be wearing a sailor outfit or uniform, or that the illustration has a thin white border and a wide purple border. The format looks similar to the format used in the illustrations for Grandfather's Journey. You could have also had several other notices of your own. Remember, nothing's wrong as long as it's about what you were looking at. Here are some wonders you might have said. Is she lonely? Why isn't anyone with her? Or, is she Japanese, like Grandfather from Grandfather's Journey? Is this a school uniform? Is the girl standing in a playground? Or is this illustration also by Alan Say? Again, you could have other wonders too. These are just a few examples. So now I want you to look at both of these covers. The cover of our new story for Tea with Milk by Alan Say, and the cover for our last story, Grandfather's Journey by Alan Say. So what similarities and differences do you notice between this illustration and the illustrations in Grandfather's Journey? We're first going to analyze this book, and then in later lessons, we're going to get to compare and contrast it with Grandfather's Journey. So after you thought about some of those similarities and differences, you might notice that the illustrations are both realistic. The border illustrations looks like the pictures in a photo album because of the borders, and that the illustration shows a young woman instead of a man. So that part is a difference. Now I want you to take a second and listen to our new story, Tea with Milk by Alan Say. Be sure to add to your notice and wonder chart as you listen if you think about anything you might want to write down. Hit play to begin. So right now, I'm not going to read over all of these notice and wonders, but if you want, you can take a second and look at some of the things maybe you noticed or wondered as you were listening to your story. So maybe you added these things to your chart. And it's important to note this bottom pink box right here. Our story, Tea with Milk, like Grandfather's Journey, is an example of realistic historical fiction. So this means that the author used his imagination to create a story that could be true, and that it's not a factual account of true events. So that's the same for our last story as well. Both of these two stories by Alan Say are realistic historical fiction. So now that we've listened to our story, I want us to take a second and think about the following text-dependent questions. I have a part of the story for you here and a picture. The picture goes with our first question. How does the illustration on page 7 clarify the meaning of the word kimono on page 6? So, we heard the word kimono, and by looking at the picture, how does it help you understand what that word means? Well, you might say that on page 7, Misako is wearing a long robe with a wide belt, so this must be a kimono. You can use this evidence in the picture to help you make sense of that word. Our next text-dependent question is, what clues in the text clarify the meaning of the word geijin on page 8? So let's take a second and look at the passage here, and we're going to read the sentence around the word geijin. So I'm going to start at the word she. She could not make friends with any of the other students. They called her geijin and laughed at her. Geijin means foreigner. So what clues in this text or in these sentences helped you understand the meaning of that new word? I hope you found the part in quotation marks that said foreigner. That's a big clue to help us understand what the word means, because it tells us what it means. So, it also helped us understand that the other students wouldn't make friends with her because she is a Gaijin. So, they were kind of insinuating that it must be a bad thing to be a Gaijin in Japan. Here's our final text-dependent question for the day. How do the events described on page 14 clarify the meaning of the word foreigner? So here we see our illustration, and then here is page 14. I'm going to read it from the beginning, and you're going to listen to find out how does it help clarify the meaning of the word foreigner. First thing, the next morning, Mizaku put on the brightest dress she had brought from California and left the house. As she hurried to the bus stop, the villagers stopped and stared. "She looks like a Gaijin," they said loudly. "I'm a foreigner in my parents' country," she thought. "And they came back here because they didn't want to be foreigners. But I wasn't born here. I should leave home and live on my own like an American daughter." The bus took her to the train station, and there she bought a ticket to Osaka. So after re-listening to that passage, what events helped you clarify the meaning of the word foreigner? You might have noticed that it said, "Neighbors say she looks like a Gaijin because she's not dressed in a kimono," or that our character, Misako, thinks that she's a foreigner in her parents' country because she feels like an American instead of a Japanese. Misako was not born in Japan, her parents' country, so a foreigner must be someone who was born in a different country. Those different clues could help you make sense of this. So here are some of our new vocabulary words that we heard in this story. Kimono is the first one. It says traditional Japanese robe-like garment with wide sleeves and a broad sash. Then there's the word calligraphy. Calligraphy is the art of handwriting. I also attached a picture of a woman wearing a kimono, so you have another visual outside of what we saw in the story as well. Learn. Linking words. How have you learned to use linking words and phrases in your writing this year? If we think back to how we've used them, you might remember that we use linking words to show the sequence of events in explanatory writing, or that we use them to show that we're adding information to an explanatory essay, or we're using them to show cause and effect relationships, or we use them to connect reasons to opinions. Now on this slide, I want you to take a look at some of the linking words and phrases we've used in previous writing tasks. To begin, in addition is a linking phrase that we've used. First is another word. Next. Second. Because. After. Later. Also. And therefore are also some of our linking words that we can use. Now, I want to tell you that there are more linking words that can be used, and those words can be used to compare and contrast things. So now, we're going to circle some words in this paragraph that are linking words, but that show us those comparisons and words that show contrasting ideas. So, let's read, and then I'll click through and I'll show you which words are circled. In Tea with Milk by Alan Say, Mizaku was a young woman who moved from San Francisco to Japan. At first, she was unhappy in Japan, but Mizaku made a life for herself there. She found some things that were similar to her old life, but there were also many differences. One thing that was similar was that Osaka and San Francisco were both big cities. Osaka had many cars, just like San Francisco. Similarly, the city noises in Osaka reminded Mizaku of the sounds of San Francisco. Mizaku was happy to be in a big city again. Even though Mizaku was happy to be in the big city of Osaka, she noticed many differences between life in Japan and life in America. In Japan, people were surprised that Mizaku could drive a car. However, in America, many women drove cars. Another difference Mizaku discovered was that in Japan, it was shameful for ladies to work. On the other hand, in America, Mizaku had planned on going to college and getting a job. Mizaku found a way to be happy in her new home. It was not easy at first, but in the end, Mizaku decided not to return to America. So now I want us to look at that second paragraph that starts with one thing. There are two words in here that are linking words that show us how things are going to compare to one another. And they're going to show up in green. One of those linking words is both, and another one is similarly. Now if we look at our third paragraph, we'll find some linking words that show us how things contrast. Those phrases and words are even though, however, and on the other hand. Those three phrases show us how different things can contrast. Now it's time for us to take our deep dive for our final step into our vocabulary. I want you to recall learning about the morpheme graph. This was taught back in Module 1 when we heard about the words biography and autobiography. We talked about how graph means to write or draw. So listen to these two sentences from our story. At home, Mizaku took lessons in flower arranging, calligraphy, and the tea company. In our second sentence, as Mizaku filled it out, she thanked her mother for making her attend the Japanese high school for the calligraphy lessons. When we listened to those two sentences, we heard the word calligraphy. Now you're all done. The last thing you have to do is to complete your exit ticket. If you have some time left in your hour of ELA activities for today, be sure to practice your fluency, read for 20, and/or practice some vocabulary words. Your fluency is attached right after this slide. Great job today, third grade.